Doctor, her pressure's dropping. The shout cut through the trauma wing just as Rodrigue saw Dr. Victor Hale rip off his gloves and step away from Elena's operating room. What are you doing? A younger surgeon demanded behind him. She's already open. Hale didn't even look back. Senator Vane just arrived. Rodrigue pushed himself off the waiting room wall, confused. My wife in there. The anesthesiologist followed Hale into the hallway. You can't pause this surgery now. She could bleed out. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Hale grabbed a clipboard from a nurse and signed something without slowing his stride. The senator goes first. Rodrigue stared at him. What? Hale finally looked up, cold and irritated, like Rodrigue was interrupting paperwork instead of begging for his wife's life. She isn't the priority. Then he walked away with half the surgical team following him down the corridor. For a second, Rodrigue honestly thought he'd misunderstood. Elena had been rushed in less than 30 minutes earlier after the highway collision. She was 7 months pregnant. A junior surgeon had told him they'd caught the internal bleeding in time. Now the operating room doors stood half open behind him. Abandoned. Rodrigue shoved toward them, but 2 nurses blocked his path. Sir, you can't go in there. My wife is in there. Nobody answered him, nobody even met his eyes. The trauma wing around him had transformed in minutes. Security guards suddenly appeared near the elevators. Administrators in suits rushed past whispering into phones. Someone rolled computer terminals down the hallway toward another operating room. Toward the senator. Rodrigue caught a terrified nurse glancing toward Elena's OR. Is she alone? He demanded. The nurse hesitated too long. Finally she whispered, there's only a resident with her now. Something cold dropped through Rodrigue's chest. He moved around the nurses and looked through the narrow glass window. Elena lay motionless beneath surgical lights, pale beneath the drapes. Tubes snaked across her body. One side of her abdomen was still exposed where the operation had been interrupted. A young resident stood frozen beside a monitor, clearly overwhelmed. Then the monitor gave a sharp warning tone. The resident looked up fast. Another tone followed. Rodrigue slammed both palms against the glass. Do something. Hands grabbed him from behind before he could force the door open. Security pulled him backward while inside the room alarms started climbing faster. She's crashing, someone shouted. At the far end of the hallway, double doors opened and Dr. Hale disappeared into another operating room surrounded by hospital executives. Not one of them looked back at Elena. Rodrigue fought against the guards until he suddenly noticed something stranger. Outside the senator's operating room, 2 administrators were collecting paperwork from nurses before they could enter. A security officer unplugged a hallway camera. Another staff member wheeled away a computer cart entirely. A shaken nurse beside Rodrigue muttered under her breath. This isn't about saving his life. Rodrigue stopped struggling. Then he turned toward the senator's operating room doors and started walking. Rodrigue stopped outside the senator's operating room just as shouting erupted behind the doors. You changed the schedule without clearance. I said continue prep. Metal instruments clattered inside. Rodrigue stared through the small wired glass window, but bodies kept moving across it too fast to make anything out clearly. The entire hallway smelled like antiseptic and burned wiring. Staff hurried past him, pretending not to notice the man whose wife had been left open down the corridor. Just 3 hours earlier, Elena had been laughing in the car beside him. If it's a girl, she'd said, rubbing her stomach, you're not nomming her after one of your army friends. Rodrigue had laughed. Why not? Sofia Ramirez Alvarez sounds strong. She sounds like she fixes helicopters. Now she was fighting for her life because he'd convinced her to switch hospitals after their insurance changed. A surgical resident finally stepped out of the senator's OR carrying bloody gauze. Rodrigue grabbed his arm immediately. What happened to my wife? The resident looked over his shoulder first, making sure nobody important was listening. She stabilized at first, he whispered, then something happened during the procedure. What does that mean? The resident swallowed hard. Dr. Hale got nervous. Nervous about what? Before he could answer, another nurse rushed past pushing a cooler labeled blood storage. Toward the senator's room. Rodrigue stared after it. That blood was supposed to go to Elena. The nurse avoided eye contact completely. Another older nurse approached carefully once the hallway cleared. "You didn't hear this from me," she said quietly, "but Dr. Hale's been chasing Senator Vane for months. Funding, partnerships, expansion projects, he treats politicians like royalty." A pair of hospital administrators suddenly appeared carrying clipboards. "Mr. Alvarez," one said smoothly, "we need your signature acknowledging emergency triage complications." Rodrigue scanned the form quickly. The timestamp claimed Elena's surgery had been paused before the senator even arrived. "That's false. It's standard procedure." "No," Rodrigue said, stepping back, "it's a lie." Suddenly alarms screamed from Elena's operating room. One long flat warning tone. Then frantic movement. "Pressure collapsing. We need blood now." Rodrigue sprinted toward the sound, but this time security physically blocked him before he reached the doors. Inside the OR, the anesthesiologist shouted over the chaos. "Where the hell is the trauma team?" Rodrigue looked past the guards toward the senator's operating room where nearly every senior surgeon still remained. His wife was dying while they protected someone powerful. The young resident appeared beside him again, pale and shaking. Then he whispered, "If you want to know why your wife was left there, you need to see what Hale is hiding in that operating room." By the time Rodrigue reached the main lobby, camera crews were already pouring through the hospital entrance. "Senator Vane is in critical surgery. Move the press line back." Hospital executives suddenly swarmed the area in tailored suits, forcing nurses and patients against the walls while reporters shoved microphones forward. Rodrigue stood there covered in Elena's blood while administrators acted like they were hosting a political event. Then the elevator doors opened. Dr. Victor Hale stepped into the lobby still wearing surgical scrubs streaked with red. Every camera turned instantly. "Dr. Hale," a reporter shouted. "Is the senator going to survive?" Hale gave a calm, practiced nod. "We are doing everything medically necessary." Rodrigue snapped. "Medically necessary?" he shouted, pushing through the crowd. "You left my wife open on an operating table." The lobby froze. Cameras swung toward him. Hale's expression hardened immediately. "Sir, emotions are high right now. She was already in surgery." Security moved toward Rodrigue, but reporters closed in first. "Is that true?" someone asked. Rodrigue pointed down the hallway. "Ask them why they abandoned a pregnant woman for a politician." Murmurs spread through the crowd instantly. But Hale stayed composed. "Unfortunately," he said carefully, "trauma prioritization can be difficult for family members to understand." The words hit Rodrigue like a slap. Family members. Not husband, not witness. Just another emotional nobody they could dismiss. Then a nurse passing beside him quickly shoved folded papers into his hand without stopping. Rodrigue opened them immediately. Surgical logs. His eyes locked onto one line. Procedure paused, equipment failure. His jaw tightened. That wasn't what happened. Hale had walked out willingly. Then Rodrigue noticed another detail farther down the page. Senator Vane's intake time had been changed. Moved earlier. Made to look more critical than Elena. Rodrigue looked up just as security grabbed his arm. "Sir, you need to leave the lobby." One guard confiscated his phone while another dragged him toward the hallway. "You're covering this up," Rodrigue shouted as reporters surged forward again. But before anyone could stop him completely, Rodrigue caught sight of the senator's operating room through the glass window. Inside, Hale was arguing furiously with another surgeon. A tray of untouched instruments sat nearby. And on the operating table, Senator Vane moved his arm. Slowly. Consciously. The man wasn't dying. Then Rodrigue's eyes shifted to a monitor near the blood station. His entire body went cold. Displayed across the screen was a transfusion order labeled Elena Alvarez. Assigned to operating room 2. The senator's room. Rodrigue exploded forward. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest guard, ripped free from their grip, and charged straight for the operating room doors. The operating room doors burst open hard enough to slam against the walls. Every person inside turned at once. "Get him out of here," someone yelled. Rodrigue barely heard them. His eyes locked immediately onto the blood units hanging beside Senator Vane's table. Elena Alvarez. Her name was printed across every label. Beside them sat surgical equipment tagged for maternal trauma response, equipment that should have been in Elena's operating room. The senator himself looked pale but alert, one hand weakly moving against the restraints. He wasn't unconscious, he wasn't even intubated. Rodrigue pointed at him in disbelief. He's awake. Dr. Hale moved fast, stepping between Rodrigue and the monitors. You are interfering with emergency surgery. No, Rodrigue shouted, you interfered with my wife. Security rushed in behind him, but Rodrigue twisted free long enough to glance at a side monitor near the anesthesia station. Elena's scans filled the screen. Next to them were internal staff messages. Containment risk. Limit record access. Exposure if patient DCLINES. Rodrigue's stomach dropped. Another surgeon near the table suddenly ripped off his mask. This has gone too far, he snapped at Hale. Be quiet, Hale warned. But the surgeon pointed toward Rodrigue instead. He nicked her artery during the procedure, he said. That's why he panicked. The room went silent. Rodrigue stared at Hale. You left her there because of your mistake. Hale's composure finally cracked. It was a complication, he barked. You think people like her get unlimited resources over a sitting senator? People like her. The words hit harder than the shouting. From the hallway outside, Elena's heart monitor alarms suddenly screamed through the intercom. We're losing pressure again, the anesthesiologist yelled. We need Dr. Hale now. Hale froze. For one brief second, Rodrigue saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Save Elena. Or save himself. Even Senator Vane looked horrified now. You stopped another surgery for me, he demanded weakly from the table. Go help the woman. Hale didn't move. Rodrigue spotted a phone lying abandoned near the instrument trays, the same phone security had taken from him earlier during the struggle. Without thinking, he grabbed it and hit record. The camera captured everything. The blood bags. The monitors. Hale refusing to leave. The other surgeon shouting that Elena would die. Security lunged toward Rodrigue again, but he backed toward the hallway and hit send on the video to the first reporter contact he saw. A guard slammed him against the wall just as the upload completed. Then suddenly, every phone inside the operating room vibrated at the same time. Breaking news alerts lit up screen after screen. And every eye in the room turned toward Dr. Victor Hale. Within minutes, Rodrigue's recording was everywhere. Local reporters replayed the footage live outside the hospital entrance while social media feeds exploded with clips of Dr. Hale saying Elena wasn't the priority. Nurses inside the building started pulling out their own phones, watching the same operating room footage that administrators were desperately trying to suppress. The hospital lobby descended into chaos. Did the hospital falsify records? Was a pregnant patient abandoned during surgery? Why was blood reassigned? Executives who had ignored Rodrigue earlier suddenly refused to answer questions at all. Security lines collapsed under the flood of reporters pushing toward the elevators. Inside the operating suite, Hale tried taking control again. You are all violating hospital protocol. No, the other surgeon interrupted sharply, you violated it. More staff began speaking up once the video spread publicly. A trauma nurse confirmed Elena had arrived first. An anesthesiologist admitted Hale walked out mid-operation after causing unexpected arterial bleeding. Another resident revealed triage times had been altered manually. The entire cover-up started unraveling in real time. And the worst part finally became undeniable. Senator Vane had never been in critical condition. His injuries were painful but stable from the moment he entered the hospital. Hale had manipulated severity scores, redirected Elena's blood supply, and stripped her operating room of personnel because saving a senator publicly would make him untouchable. Especially after his surgical mistake on Elena. If she died during the confusion, responsibility could disappear with her. But she didn't die. Hours later, Rodrigue sat alone outside the operating room with dried blood covering his sleeves. The hallway had gone strangely quiet after the FBI and state investigators arrived. Hospital administrators passed by without looking at him. Then Elena's anesthesiologist finally stepped through the doors. Exhausted, pale, mask hanging loose around his neck. Rodrigue stood so fast his chair flipped backward. The doctor looked at him for a long second before speaking softly. "She made it." Rodrigue covered his face with both hands as his knees nearly gave out beneath him. Another trauma surgeon had returned after Hale was removed from the case. They repaired the arterial damage and stabilized both Elena and the baby, though the recovery ahead would be long. When Rodrigue finally entered her room, Elena looked impossibly small beneath the blankets. Her eyes opened slowly as he approached. She noticed the blood still staining his clothes. "You stayed," she whispered weakly. Rodrigue took her hand carefully. "I wasn't leaving you there." Tears slid silently down her face as she squeezed his fingers. The fallout came fast after that night. Dr. Victor Hale was arrested on charges of criminal negligence, evidence tampering, and falsifying emergency records. Multiple hospital executives resigned within days as investigators uncovered internal messages discussing political pressure and record manipulation. The hospital itself lost accreditation review status and faced lawsuits from former patients and employees alike. And Senator Marcus Vane, humiliated publicly after learning Hale used him as leverage for funding deals, testified against him during the investigation. The man Rodrigue once thought was untouchable became one of the key witnesses that destroyed Hale's career. Months later, Rodrigue slowly pushed Elena's wheelchair out of a rehabilitation clinic while carrying their newborn daughter against his chest. News coverage played silently on a television near the exit. Dr. Hale, handcuffed and surrounded by cameras, was being escorted into court. Elena watched the screen quietly before looking up at Rodrigue. "Do you regret fighting back?" Rodrigue looked down at his daughter sleeping peacefully in his arms. Then he looked back at the television. "The night they decided my wife wasn't important enough to save was the same night they destroyed everything they thought their power could protect."